Good evening. Can you hear me? Okay. Good evening. And welcome to the 2025 UNLV Physical Therapy Distinguished Lecture Series. I'm Lisa Taylor, and I'm a proud faculty member and Director of Clinical Education here at UNLV's Physical Therapy Department. Before we begin, I do want to take a moment to recognize the significance of today being September 11th and to remember those that have been impacted by terror or violence. Today and all days, I urge you to renew your commitment to values that will make us stronger together: resilience, community, kindness, and understanding. Let us observe a brief moment of silence for those impacted by terror or violence. Thank you. With that remembrance in our minds, let's turn to today's lecture. This distinguished lecture series was started in 2012, and over the years, the series has featured some of the most innovative, inspiring, and influential leaders in our profession. I am so honored to introduce you to tonight's distinguished lecturer, Dr. Kimberly Varnado, who is truly one of the best of the best. Dr. Varnado is a visionary in physical therapy education and practice. Throughout her career, she has advocated for evidence-based practice. She's guided and inspired students and colleagues, and has played a pivotal role in advancing our profession. Here are just a few of her achievements. She is a board-certified orthopedic clinical specialist emeritus, a fellow of the American Academy of Orthopedic Manual Physical Therapists, and the founding DPT director at the College of St. Mary. And I know some of your students are here today. She is also the president of the American Council of Academic Physical Therapy, or ACAPT, associate editor of the Journal of Physical Therapy Education, and is the founder, a mentor, and instructor at Inquisicare Institute. She's also a mom, and she's just amazing. She's absolutely practices at the top of her license, embodying exactly what we hope for all of our UNLV physical therapy graduates. But one of the many things I admire about Dr. Varnado is her inspiring leadership. She leads with passion, purpose, and an unwavering belief in the power of people. She starts meaningful conversations about important topics that we need to talk about in our field, and she not only welcomes everyone to the table for those conversations, but she helps people find a seat at that table if they don't see one for themselves. And that type of uplifting, uniting mentorship is exactly what will continue to drive our profession forward and elevate it to new heights. So I'm so honored to introduce you to our 2025 UNLV Physical Therapy Distinguished Lecturer, Dr. Kimberly Varnado.
Oh, wow. Thank you for that warm welcome and amazing introduction. I am so honored to be here. When I got the initial invitation, I just thought, and she shared with me who your previous lectures have been. I was very just in awe, and just thank you so much for the invitation. I'm so grateful. Also grateful to be sharing some of these topics with you. Those of you who know me, I love to read, and I love to read about different thought leaders. And I also like to find solutions to problems. I'm a problem solver. That's something that's very, it comes naturally to me. And so what I want to share today are just some things that I write about that sometimes I don't have a chance to exchange in conversation with people about. Or if I am invited to talk about them, it's normally about 10 or 15 minutes on a panel. And there's never really a lot of time to really, let the conversation breathe a bit. And so I'm so grateful to have this time with you to discuss this topic: from provider to partners, building health with, not for, communities. Tomorrow, I'm super excited tonight we're talking about rewriting the PT Playbook, cultural connection, the new standard of care. And then tomorrow I'll be with the students, and we'll be talking about classrooms as launch pads for culturally responsive change makers. Special thank you to the UNLV learning community. Again, I'm so very honored to be here and to share some of my ideas and be in community with you. Also, a special thank you to Dr. Merrill Landers. I've been a fan of his for quite some time, and I'm so honored I get to serve on a board with him for the Physical Therapy Learning Institute. And every time we're together, we just cut up. It's always a good time. Also, special thank you to Dr. Ho. I've had a chance to spend time with her today, and it's been great to learn about her leadership in this amazing learning community that you all have. Also, Dr. Lisa Taylor, she has been just amazing from the very beginning. I contacted her, she contacted me because my schedule is always crazy. And she really helped me figure out specifically what to talk about and what would be best suited for your community. And so I'm really grateful for her guidance in that. And also to my home college, where I'm currently working, College of St. Mary. I'm so grateful that they allow me to be here, but then also a lot of the ideas I get to talk about are things that I get to really practice there. And also one of my students is here, Eden. Thank you for coming. So here are the learning objectives. I know it looks like a long list, but don't worry, I'll cover them. And I'm gonna start my timer because I like to be on time and make sure we don't go over. The learning objectives, we're going to be recalling the 3 pillars of evidence-based practice. I'm sure many of you are familiar with those. Explaining social and political determinants of health, describing characteristics of a culturally responsive practitioner, identifying at least one method to incorporate a person's culture into your care plan, defining the role community plays in health, determining the role of a culture responsive practitioner co-creating health with communities, and using an asset-based community development approach to co-create health with your communities. The learning intentions. I am learning the importance of understanding patient values and circumstances to support optimal health outcomes. I am learning the characteristics of a culturally responsive practitioner. I'm learning to define my role as a culturally responsive practitioner, co-creating health with my community. And I'm learning to use an asset-based community development approach to co-creating health with people. The success criteria for these learning intentions, I can select at least one method to incorporate someone's culture into their care plan. I can reflect on my own culture and identify how my culture may influence how I engage with people. I can use my position, privilege, and knowledge to connect people to community resources. And lastly, I can use an asset-based community development approach to co-create health with my community. I'll be honest, number 4 is going to take some time, but I'll introduce some concepts and then also an opportunity if you want to advance your training in this space, I have something to share with you at the end. So this is where we're going. We'll be merging 3 paradigms together. I'm sure you're all familiar with evidence-based practice. That's using the 3 pillars of evidence to inform our delivery of care. Culture responsive practitioner, that might seem like a new concept, but you're already probably using this. You've been culturally responsive, but typically to the dominant demographic that you're around. What I'm proposing is that we begin to be culturally responsive to all populations that are around us. And then the community development. Now, this might be a bit of a new paradigm, but this is where we tend to look at, typically from a healthcare perspective, as being a healthcare provider, sometimes the perception is that we're the purveyor of health. Like if people have access to us, then they'll be healthy. But this is a bit of a different paradigm shift to actually the health starting in the community with people, and then we're there to help facilitate that process. And the perfect person I thought to embody this idea, the picture next to the paradigms, is a clinician that I had the opportunity to meet at the 2023 Ascend conference that's hosted by WebPT. This is Dr. Morgan Bronzenheim. She's a founder of Blaze Physio, and she was named Innovator of the Year. Has anyone ever heard of Blaze Physio? Okay. Dr. Bronzenheim was recognized for her unique physical therapy practice that serves long-distance hikers and runners. Dr. Bronzenheim graduated in 2017, and in 2019, she hiked the Pacific Crest Trail, where she saw countless hikers deal with similar injuries, resulting in expensive hotel stays. They had to quit their trail, or they lost their trail family. Dr. Bronzenheim was determined to make a difference in injury rates of through hikers. And so her dad helped her. She has a red van that he makeshift into basically a mobile home and also a clinic. And she has her dog who's with her, Honey, and together they go and treat people along the Pacific Crest Trail. She also has a remote telehealth practice attached to that business model. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. I had a chance to sit with her and talk and ask questions. And what was just so interesting to me was she didn't say, you know what, I'm going to create this clinic and people are going to come to me. She used her clinical expertise. She understood, if you're going to help hikers continue on the trail, you got to be good at what you do. She also understood the hiker's life. She was also a hiker, so she understood what it takes in order to do that, grueling, physically taxing work. And she went to where the people were. She didn't wait for them to come to her. She created a model that would actually help serve that community. And so to me, she really embodies what this paradigm looks like. And so this is where we're going. I'm sure you all are familiar with this model, this evidence-based practice model. This was developed by Dr. Linda Fetters and Dr. Julie Tilson. And I always, when I first started teaching, I remember seeing this picture and I thought, wow, that's just interesting because they had me teaching some of the evidence-based practice tracks. So I had to learn this book and read it. And what was interesting, this is the model. We've got our 3 pillars of evidence. We've got, clinical expertise along with evidence from scientific research, also the patient values and circumstances. And so with that information, the provider with the clinician, they work together in this dynamic process, and together through shared decision-making, they get to optimal patient outcomes. So clinical expertise, we have been really doing a lot of great work here. And this is where we're deciding what to do with our patients. I had the honor of going through and the pleasure of going through, privilege, I should say, of going to a residency fellowship program where I had advanced training. And so what I like now about what's happening, if you take a look at Tree and look at the different directories of residency fellowship programs, back when I did it years ago, there were lots of ortho. Ortho's always been heavy, I don't know why. But the other is there weren't quite as many programs. But now if you look at the directory, there's so many more programs that are available. And so we have really been spending a lot of time figuring out how to develop clinical experts. And if you don't have an opportunity to go to residency fellowship, there's lots of Con Ed courses that are out there. So you can basically specialize in anything you want. And that's just fantastic. Also, not for just for physical therapists, but for physical therapist assistants. They have tracks where they can also become experts in certain areas. So I think in this pillar, we've been doing a great job as clinicians really developing, figuring out what the community needs, and then upskilling. Scientific research, and this is basically just, a systematic process of testing hypotheses, either using clinical research or using basic sciences. And if we think back to where we were as far as the scholarship that was being produced by academicians, 2 decades ago, it's not nearly what it is now. Now we have to produce something every other year, which is, I believe, an achievable goal. In addition to that, we have clinicians that are really contributing significantly to the body of research. I really love going to CSM and seeing what all the clinicians are bringing forward and also reading our journals, because then we get to see what's happening out in the clinic. And so I think in this pillar, we are really making some progress, and I'm so grateful to be a part of, the work that's being published. When we talk about patient values and circumstances, those are the values, beliefs, preferences, expectations, cultural identities, circumstances, comorbidities, access to care, and support networks. I'm so grateful. I had a chance to present with Dr. Julie Tilson in 2024 at CSM, and we were bridging the gap between this model of evidence-based practice with JEDI. And so it really got me thinking more about, well, how do we actually do this? According to Fetters and Tilson, the patient values and circumstances pillar is the most important pillar of evidence to the shared decision-making model. But if you recall on the first slide that I showed you, the pillars are all equal in size. If this is the most important pillar of evidence in the shared decision-making process, should it be more prominently represented? My question to this community: considering the enormous gains that we've made in clinical expertise and scientific research pillars, is there evidence in what we teach and how we practice that patient values and circumstances are the most critical pillar of evidence? You look at our curriculums. I'm definitely ortho through and through. We have a lot of clinical courses, but typically for the patient values and circumstances, maybe 1 or 2 classes really touch on that topic. And if you think about Con Ed courses, they're mostly clinically based. 22 years ago, the Institute of Medicine report highlighted racial and ethnic health disparities that persist, resulting from factors such as bias, stereotyping, and prejudice on the part of the provider. Health inequities stem from structural racism and macro-level bias intrinsic in the design and operations of our healthcare institutions. Practitioners who use race-based clinical guidelines informed by research that's flawed and have a flawed understanding of race fail to provide patients from marginalized communities with adequate diagnosis and treatment. And just so we're on the same page, race is not a biological construct, it's a social construct. Yet health education and clinical practice have not fully adapted to this understanding, often misusing race and ethnicities as proxies for genetic variation. Health disparities are preventable differences in health outcomes that disproportionately affect racial, ethnic minorities, and individuals with low socioeconomic status. These disparities are evident in disease rates, mortality rates, access to care, and quality of treatment. And some confounding factors are if the person lives in a rural community, if the person is disabled, they have a disability, and if they have sexual minority status, that can intensify health disparities. These issues are often rooted in the intergenerational discrimination and systemic social disadvantage. In America, it is not a coincidence that certain groups experience higher premature death rates than others. It's not a fluke that groups experience poverty for generations or are blocked from attaining the American dream. When we examine the root causes, one major factor that has exacerbated health disparities is our political system. The system hasn't always valued each group equally. And hopefully you don't get too alarmed by the word political, because basically that just means you're looking at your community, seeing what you need, and you're saying, hey, we need resources. That's all it is. High obesity rates, depression, maternal mortality, infant mortality, cancer, diabetes, heart disease, and other health problems are linked to political action or inaction. Dawes, who's the author of Political Determinants of Health, defines political determinants of health as the systems, policies, decisions made by governments and political institutions that shape the conditions in which people live, work, have access to healthcare. These determinants go beyond the social factors. They are the upstream forces that create and influence the social determinants of health. Some key concepts for political determinants of health: policy choices, so laws, regulations that affect housing, education, transportation, and access to healthcare. Distribution of power and resources, who gets what when, and how often is influenced by voting, by representation, and by governance. Structural conditions, so political decisions can lead to inequities in neighborhoods, environmental safety, access to clean water, and food availability. This past summer, I had the opportunity to travel to New Orleans and for Essence Festival, and it was the 20th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina. And it was amazing to see, of course, hearing about the devastation. I remember living through it. I was graduating for DPT school at the time, but just to hear, and now there are lots of documentaries coming out about what happened afterwards and those communities that weren't able to rebuild and what happened politically that made that situation even worse. Social determinants of health refers to non-medical factors that influence our health outcomes. They include the conditions in which people are born, grow, live, work, and age, and are influenced by a distribution of money, power, and resources at the global, national, and local levels. According to the Department of Health and Human Services, social determinants of health can be grouped into 5 key domains: economic stability, so that's income, employment, expenses, debt, financial support; education access and quality, literacy, early childhood development, vocational training, higher education; health access and quality, availability of services, health insurance, health literacy; neighborhood and built environment, so housing, transportation, safety, parks, and walkability; social and community context, support, community engagement, discrimination, and workplace conditions. So why is this important? These factors can determine your risk for disease, your ability to access care, and even how long you live. For example, if you live in a food desert with limited access to nutritious food, your risk of developing type 2 diabetes increases. Some scholars have assigned a relative percentage of impact of each of these determinants of health. So we look at our picture here, we've got healthcare, that's 20%. So even with all our letters behind our names, we only really impact 20%. Socioeconomic factors, that's 40%. Our physical environment, 10%, and health behaviors, 30%. So we have an impact on the 20, but then there's 80% that is what the patient is basically managing. And that's their patient values and circumstances. Those are their circumstances. And we're basically trying to manage that 20. But my question really goes to, if we are not helping with the 80%, which is that third pillar, the patient values and circumstances, Are we using all three pillars of evidence? And if we're not, are we actually providing evidence-based care? What barriers exist that prevent you from addressing all three pillars? Is my question. As healthcare practitioners, do you feel equipped to support people along their health journey as it relates to addressing social determinants of health and political determinants of health? What skills do you need to connect citizens to community resources to address these factors? In preparing for this lecture, I had a chance to look at Nevada's data. This is your census data. Demographic changes and improvements to the ways in which race and ethnicity data are collected have been processed and revealed that the US population is becoming more racially and ethnically diverse than measured in 2010. The US Census Bureau uses a diversity index to measure the probability that two people chosen at random will be from different racial and ethnic groups. I'm not sure if I have a pointer, but what's interesting about this picture is that, Nevada's in the top 10 states for the highest diversity index, and actually you're higher than California. So you look at the column over here to the side, you have the highest percentage difference from 2010 to 2020. I'm really excited to see what happens when the for 2030 census comes out. If we look a little bit further, the number of individuals who identify as white have decreased by 8.2% in 10 years. The number of individuals who identify as American Indian and Alaska Native have decreased by 0.1%. All other groups have increased in percentage points. So considering the demographic changes, having the necessary skills to interact and engage with people who are different, have different lived experiences, is critical to understanding the patient's and values and circumstances pillar. And given the demographic shifts in Nevada's race and ethnicity with a diversity index of 68.8% in 2020, is it good business for our profession to consider how we serve these populations? I bring this up because in physical therapy, if you look clinically and even look in academia, we don't have a lot of diversity. We haven't. And there have been some efforts to change that, but we're going to have to upskill pretty quickly. The population is changing and we haven't really changed. So how do we begin this change process? Let's talk about culture. First, I like to dispel a myth. Everyone has culture. I think there's a perception that only non-white people have culture. That's just a lie. Everybody has culture. Culture is a dynamic system of social values, cognitive codes, behavioral standards, worldviews, and beliefs that give order and meaning to our lives. Culture influences how we think, believe, communicate, and behave. It in turn affects how we teach and learn. Cultural connection refers to the identification with and understanding of the tangible and intangible customs, artifacts, qualities, customs, practices, beliefs, and languages of a group or society that are passed down between generations. It involves recognizing shared histories, including struggles, and fostering a mutual understanding and appreciation of cultural differences and commonalities. Cultural connection can help bridge the gap between groups, reduce stereotypes, and promote emotional bonding and creative thinking. It's about feeling a sense of belonging and resonance with a particular culture, whether it's your own or someone else's. So in order to further go down this path of cultural, think about cultural responsive practice practitioner, I did a little bit of research and I was on Instagram. Sometimes I'll do that on my downtime. I don't have a lot of downtime, but when I am on there, it's always a good time. And so I was scrolling through Instagram and this Black lady came on. She was like, oh my gosh, I just had the most amazing healthcare experience. It was at Tia Health. Has anybody ever heard of Tia Health? Okay, they have offices located in Los Angeles, New York, San Francisco, and Arizona. And when she said she had this amazing healthcare experience, I was like, I must find out about this place. So I went online, checked them out. And what was interesting was that I learned a lot about the founder and also about what made them different than other practices. Their model, if you look at the center, diversity, equity, inclusion is at the middle of what they do. And what's interesting too is that all the practitioners provide culturally informed care. And if you really look at their website, they market to women and they also market to women from marginalized communities. And I've never seen that before. And so I had to continue to investigate. So Tia's founder is Carolyn Witt. She states that the company was born out of her dehumanizing experience, unanswered questions, and difficulty navigating the medical system. The goal established by Tia's founder was to make women healthier and enable every woman to make informed choices for their body and life. The founder started by building an app called Tia. The company began as a texting service that served as the answer to WebMD and Google Health, and Google for health-related inquiries. After conducting over 200,000 one-to-one conversations with women about their health, the founders discovered that women wanted Tia to be their primary care doctor. They then transitioned the app into an inclusive modern medical home for women. And that's Tia's origin. If you scan this QR code, it'll take you right there. I want to share a quick little video from the founder of Tia Health.
So as a female founder building a healthcare company focused exclusively on women, I've had quite a journey of convincing, I should say, the venture community that women's health is not niche, but a multi-billion-dollar opportunity every single year. I've just closed $100 million Series B, which is funny. An early stage company focused exclusively on women. And I think it's been 4 years or almost 5 years for me building this company to where we're at today. And what I experienced really in the financing was, I would describe it as a tectonic shift in many ways from my prior rounds fundraising, trying to change a mental model that was very dated, that women's health is niche, a body part, so forth. 50% of the population, instead of recognizing that women are the most powerful yet underserved customer in healthcare who controls more than 80% of the dollars. And so it was really exciting to see this shift in the venture community around recognizing that women's health is not niche, but as I like to say, a $2.6 trillion opportunity every year. That's incredible.
$2.6 trillion opportunity. So what does Tia Health get right? So in investigating, not only did I look at the website, I decided to become a member. To become a member of Tia Health, you have to pay a membership fee to get access to this medical home. It's about $150 to $250. It's kind of the price you pay. And they take insurance. So after that fee, the rest is basically covered from insurance. And what was interesting about this experience was it was like a hybrid model. So initially you go online, you can see all the providers and choose whoever you want based on their background and what they have put on the website. And it's really nice. It's not the typical, stale looking stuff. It's really interesting to read. And so I picked up a provider and it was a great conversation. And, I'm a healthcare provider, so I'm probably the worst patient because, I'm always checking to see, can they clinically reason? I'm always really trying to figure out the skill level person I'm working with. And so she was sharp. She knew her stuff. And I said, okay, then they have you, after you do your telehealth visit, they bring you in for the full comprehensive exam. Wow, bad experience. So it's in Scottsdale. So I drive to Scottsdale and I go up the elevator and I walk in, and right away, I was amazed. You can tell that they designed this place for women. It was beautiful. You actually wanted to sit down. Typically when I go to doctor's office, I don't want to sit down, but it was very comfortable chairs and a seating arrangement. And they had this bookshelf and it was full of books. And what really caught my attention was that one of the books on the bookshelf was one that is Medical Apartheid, The Dark History of Medical Experimentation on Black Americans from Colonial Times to the Present by Harriet Washington. That's on my bookshelf. What's that doing in the medical office? And I thought, I've never seen this before. So I wonder what kind of care I'm about to receive because they are reading these books clearly and they have them in the waiting room. So I thought, wow, okay, this is on the bookshelf. What's about to happen next? So they usher me back and I'm looking around and this, of course, is modern, very nice. And then I walk into the room and, ladies, when you walk into the room and they give you that scratchy white gown that's disposable and who wants to put that on? There's none of that. It's like a boudoir and there's a curtain, there's a hanger and there's the satin robe that you get to put on and it's got like some nice floral design on it. You can't keep the robe. You can't keep the robe. They give you socks to take home, and the socks, one is white, one is black, one says inhale, one says exhale. And so your feet are toasty during the visit. I mean, who thought of this? And so I'm sitting there for my visit, and the practitioner says, "Would you like to tell me your weight?" I was like, "You're asking me if I want to give you my weight?" Like, normally they said, "Give them a scale," right? They were asking, and I said, "Sure, my weight is this." And it was just a really good experience. So I just thought, wow, this is, and they were knowledgeable. It was through and through, it's been a good experience. But I'm a relatively healthy person, so I really haven't really had to use the medical system too much. But then something happened last year. I had a couple family members pass away due to cancer. And so my stress level increased a lot. And also, things kind of picked up a lot at ACAPT, where I currently am the president. And so I started having some weird chest symptoms, just this chest discomfort, and I didn't really know what it was. I work out a lot, so I was thinking, it didn't come along with exercise. Sometimes I'd be at my desk working, and all of a sudden I would feel this discomfort. And I would check my vitals because sometimes my alarm would go up. I'm a tech geek person, by the way. So it was saying, "Kim, take some deep breaths." I'm like, oh, okay, maybe I'm stressed out. So I did that. And then all of a sudden, the symptoms in 2025, they began to be a bit more frequent. So then I got a little concerned. So I go into the portal and I make my appointment for my annual. And I'm in speaking with my healthcare practitioner, DMP. And she takes my blood pressure and it's 120 over 82. And she says, "Well, your blood pressure is slightly elevated." I said, "Actually, that's a lot elevated for me. I'm normally 100 over 60. And I said, "I've been having these just chest discomfort moments. I don't know what it is. It doesn't feel like, elephants sitting on my chest, all the typical things they talk about as it relates to heart attacks." And she looked at me and she said, "Kim, you're a Black woman. And so a cardiac condition might show up a bit differently on you than someone else. So if it's okay with you, I'd like to refer you to a Black female cardiologist who's in the Valley. She's excellent. And I just want to be sure. It's probably nothing, but let's just check it out." I was like, "Sounds good to me. Let's do it." So she sends a referral over and I make the appointment. The earliest appointment is August. This is March. And I'm thinking, well, that's an access issue. But hopefully nothing happens over the summer. So I'm going about, things, just waiting for this appointment. Then I start having different symptoms. And turns out I'm going through perimenopause. Like, oh, that's just wonderful. So I'm back in the portal. Something's going on. Give me hormones, apparently. That's what they're saying on Instagram. So the practitioner, she was so kind. She was like, "Oh, Kim, let's do some thorough evaluations before we start giving you on hormones. Let's just take it easy." And so they've been running me through a battery of tests and stuff. Anyway, I finally get in to see the cardiologist. And was she sharp and knowledgeable? Just spectacular. And I shared with her, I said, it's a bit different than most. I said, I lead remote teams of highly educated people who have at least one doctorate. So she looked at me. She said, "At least one?" I said, "Yes," which means that it's a complex group and we have lots of different issues that we have to grapple with. And we're in higher education, so it's super stressful sometimes. And so, I want you to know that information in addition to all the other things that you're hearing about or seeing objectively. And as she's taking my blood pressure, again, it's elevated, same 120 over 82. And so she's like, "Let's check that blood pressure again." And it did go down a little bit, but still, it was still high for me. So it was interesting about that encounter. She says, "Oh, by the way," because I mentioned perimenopausal symptoms, and she said, "Oh, by the way, if you're going through perimenopause, just know that your body is more sensitive to sodium. So you need to change your diet." Now, diet-wise, I'm healthy-ish. Exercise, hopefully that balances things out. That's not really true, and it doesn't work anymore, apparently, in perimenopause. So I listened to what she had to say and I adjusted my diet and she has me checking my blood pressure and now it's back to 100 over 60. But if she hadn't said that and if we hadn't had that exchange, would that have been caught? What I'm explaining to you is this is the first time ever in my life that I've had quality healthcare where I feel like I'm not going to be, falling through the cracks. And I'm so grateful for that. And also, this should be the standard of care. This shouldn't be some extraordinary experience that I'm sharing. Maybe the gowns, maybe that's a bit much. But the other parts, that should be the standard of care. We have so many human variations. We need healthcare practitioners who understand those different variations and who bring that into the clinic when they're treating patients. Because how I identify, a lot of times my access to care is dependent upon the person who's in front of me. And it doesn't matter how much money I make, how many degrees or letters I have behind my name. If they don't view me as a human being and don't think that I'm deserving of quality healthcare, I won't receive it. And so I'm highlighting Tia Health because I believe they're getting it right. And I know with the ladies at Tia Health, I'm going to live to be 110 easily. I'm going to be healthy doing it. So some things to share about being a culturally responsive practitioner. This means that you understand different styles of communication, that you understand different family structures and supports and identities, expressions of sexuality and gender, issues of racism, bias, and distrust, understanding and considering of diverse cultural backgrounds, practicing through a cultural frame of reference. Becoming becoming a culture responsive practitioner, I'm involved in the work of Zaretta Hammond. It's identifying, the larger social political context and how you're positioned based on your own culture and privilege. It's viewing people's behaviors through not only your own cultural lens, it's learning to see beyond your cultural interpretations as the only possible explanations. It's recognizing how your reference points may advantage or disadvantage you with the larger sociopolitical context. To further unpack what it means to be a cultural responsive practitioner, we're going to borrow from cultural responsive pedagogy paradigm. And in this paradigm, there are three dimensions: the personal, instructional, and institutional. We're going to focus on personal. And basically, cultural responsive pedagogy is just teaching to and through students personal and cultural strengths and their intellectual capabilities and prior accomplishments. So the personal dimension, it's dealing with cognitive and emotional processes that the educator must engage in to become culturally responsive. The personal dimension, in order to really develop in this area, so just to kind of break it down further, if I'm culturally responsive as an educator, I've got to make sure that how I'm showing up in the classroom, that I'm understanding why I think the way I think and how I represent myself, and also my lived experiences and what I grew up with, my family members, what were their thought processes, and how has that influenced the way that I show up. Within the personal dimension, it requires a lot of reflection. That's an important element. It's honestly examining your attitudes and beliefs about yourself and others. It's exploring why you are who you are. It's allowing for the confrontation of bias. It's acknowledging memberships in different groups. Maybe there are certain groups that you're a part of that others aren't welcome. It's looking at that. It's also learning about the history and experiences of people from different cultures. Zaretta Hammond writes that culture is like the air we breathe, and it permeates all that we do. The hardest culture to examine is often our own because it shapes our actions in ways that seem invisible and normal. The first step is to understand how your own cultural values shape your expectations of people that you encounter. It requires that we examine our deeply held beliefs that influence how we respond to others. So I've got a journaling activity, but I would like for you all to kind of do this at home. So if you wouldn't mind taking a picture of this slide. And this is really something that I've been going on, a bit of a journey of my own, of mapping out, your various identities: race, gender, background, geographic origin, and identifying which identities have afforded you privilege in your educational and professional aspirations, which have presented challenges for you. And how might your identity influence how patients perceive you and how you perceive them? And so just spend time just mapping it out and journaling. And you don't have to share it with anybody. This is your own personal experience. Something that we've been exploring and I teach in the DPT program is the scope note. Has anyone ever heard of the scope note? Okay, during the pandemic, I had the opportunity. Now, SOAP note is typical, everybody knows what SOAP note is. But when I was during the pandemic, I happened to be a part of a few different listening sessions, and one of them they mentioned, adding culture to the scope note. And so what we've been doing in a DPT program is really teaching students to ask these questions. So when they're interviewing their patients, they're finding out, what are your health beliefs and practices? What are your values? If there are any health disparities, they document that and any contributing factors. So they identify strengths that their patients have. And so I have a little activity for us to do together, if you wouldn't mind. And online, we can break you off into groups if necessary, but if you wouldn't mind turning to your neighbor and just asking some cultural questions. They may not have an injury, that's fine, but just asking them, so what are your health beliefs and practices? And just kind of get into the habit of that. So we're going to ask each other those questions. We'll take basically 4 minutes all together, and then we'll circle back up. How's that sound? All right, let's go for it.
I can't share anything.
Lisa, Dr. Taylor, we good to go. Yeah. All right, we're bringing people back from the breakout rooms. And I'm just curious, how was that experience for you? You can talk to me, it's okay. Go for it.
We were talking about how at first we might have a hard time
Sorry.
answering that
What?
question, but what we interact with over time. Somebody just asks, what is your health values and perception? You know, I don't know what's fun.
Yeah, that's fair.
maybe even making it something that's a bit more relatable, so you can always keep the language, so what's something that's really important to you as a listener? Somebody might say, can I really believe in taking my son, but I'm good. He does that, but I don't think it's correct. But you can start there. Thank you for that. Any other thoughts? Yeah,
For me, I just felt like,
be connected with nature.
yeah, it's not really, different puzzle. So they count issues.
So if a patient said that to you, your care plan, would you modify based on what they just said?
Right, start.
Well, they could get you the answer, so getting out in nature, that's important to them, so maybe as opposed to get on that treadmill, your assignment is go out and walk. Yes.
You're talking a fair bit about mental health.
About stress and anxiety and how that plays into how we feel and the rest of our health and healthy behaviors in general. And so it was interesting to hear how quickly that came up. And I think that if we don't ask about that with the folks we're seeing for physical problems, we're liable to miss something that's really important.
It was all about me.
Yeah. You know, it's so important to, when we first start teaching this to students, initially they're like, you know what the yeah. And we introduced this the second semester of the program, so they get used to asking this question. In fact, it's built into the clinical reasoning model, our framework, and it's built into the documentation system. So you got to answer, you got to ask these questions. And so they just get into the habit of doing it. But I do want to address the fact that, you know, this might be very uncomfortable for some people to engage in. And what if you say something wrong? And I think that's what is a common fear for most people is, you know, what if I say something that's offensive? Well, here's the reality. We're going to make mistakes. So let's get over that. It's really knowing how to respond in case something happens. And so what I'd like to share with you is a SOTA method that Zaretta Hammond shares in her book, Culture Responsive Teaching and the Brain. And the SOTA method is really a way of managing our emotions when we're triggered if something happens and we happen to make a mistake when trying to learn more about people. Once triggered, we got about 10 seconds to calm ourselves down before there's amygdala hijack. The S in SOTA is to stop, pause, and reflect rather than going to our habitual habits of responding negatively and being open to other people's points of view. The O is for observing and taking deep breaths. So take about 10 seconds of deep breaths just to get your system to calm down. The D is for detached, deliberately shifting your consciousness to something a bit more pleasant. So you know what, I'm here. I'm trying to learn to be a more culturally responsive practitioner. I want to show up better for my patients. And so I'm going to focus on that and also listening to what the person's sharing, but I'm not going to, not ever try it again. I'm going to learn from this encounter. And then the A is for awakening. When our amygdala reacts, we are trying to protect ourselves. That's a natural protective mechanism. Try to see it from the other person's point of view. Stay curious, ask questions about the other person, and shift over to their perspective. So in case you happen to encounter this and you might say something wrong, just consider that. I want to say though, at Ask Tia, or Tia, call it Ask Tia, Tia Health. Actually, the website, when you click on it, it says Ask Tia, and it's probably from when it was an app from back in the day. But anyway, they didn't necessarily come out and ask me my cultural beliefs, but the way in which they engage with me is like they've done a lot of reading themselves. Like they must be in some continuing education courses. I think I might go undercover and maybe become a practitioner to figure out how they prepare their clinicians. But it's amazing. Whatever training they're going through, it's been consistent. Every single provider has nailed it. If you're interested in learning more about people's histories, myself, along with my colleagues, we wrote a paper that really does do a little bit of a dive into our U.S. history, our healthcare, our education system, and our healthcare system. And I really do believe like reading books and learning more about people's lived experiences is super important. So in case you're looking for a place to kind of start, I recommend maybe just the first part. You have to read the whole paper, but the first part does do a little bit of a dive into our healthcare system. All right, now we're going to shift paradigms. So we've done evidence-based practice. We've looked at that, the three pillars, patient values and circumstances. We need to make sure that we are understanding that. In order to understand patient values and circumstances, we need to be culturally responsive practitioners. Now we're going to shift to community development. I would like to welcome you to a paradigm shift from the traditional medical model where the provider is viewed as the sole producer of health and well-being. Healthcare practitioners intentionally co-creating health with citizens, recognizing that the communities, when connected, have innate health-producing capabilities and capacities. This is a video of Cormac Russell. He's a leader in the community development space. He is really building on the work of John Kresman and John McKnight, and these were the developers of the asset-based community development approach. And we'll talk about it on the other side.
Thank you. The question, can I help you, is a question that millions of people ask millions of other people every single day. What does it actually mean to help another human being, or to help an entire community? I believe that helping is a powerful and often beautiful human impulse. But I also believe that helping has a shadow side. Certain styles or forms of helping are actually doing more harm than good. Elizabeth Moss Cantor, the Harvard academic, puts it beautifully when she says that when we do change to people, they experience it as violence. But when people do change for themselves, they experience it as liberation. Today, I want to present a very simple idea. The idea is this: if we want to help people in a way that does no harm to them and their capacities and their communities, the best place to start is with what is strong within them and within their communities, not with what's wrong. There is an abundance of evidence that calls us to this way of helping. The 75-year study on what makes happiness possible, the longitudinal study from Harvard, which reminds us that it's best to lean into our relationships and to create community rather than lean into ourselves and we. The work of the Kettering Foundation, which studies what happens when democracies work as they should. And indeed, here in the UK, the work of the New Economics Foundation, which has helped us to see the 5 ways to well-being. Still, despite the fact that thousands and thousands of pieces of evidence call us to the idea that we should start with the capacities and abilities in people and in communities, we see this great preponderance, governmental and non-governmental programs alike, the focus and the obsession with starting on what is wrong, what is broken, what is pathological within people. Sadly, that focus has caused huge harm to millions of people around the world, especially poor people and especially communities. And it has created 4 harms, unintended as they may be in particular. The first of which is it actually takes people who are trying to help, and it defines them not by their gifts and their capacities and what they can bring to the solution, but by their deficiencies and their problems. The second unintended consequence of this top-down obsession with what's wrong is that money, which is intended to go to those who need the help, doesn't. It actually goes to those who are paid to provide the services to those who need help. The third unintended consequence is that active citizenship, the power to take action and to respond at the grassroots level, retreats in the face of ever-increasing technocracy, professionalism, and expertise. And finally, entire neighborhoods, entire communities that have been defined as deficient start to internalize that map. That anything is going to change for them. It's when some outside expert with the right program and the right money comes in to rescue them. These are unintended harms. No caring professional wants these things to happen, but it's also clear that no community needs these things to happen. Fortunately, there's another way of thinking about helping. We can begin to actually reflect on a form of helping which starts with a focus on what's wrong, not what's wrong, and literally turns our traditional ideas of helping inside out. John McKnight and Jody Kretzmann, 2 professors at Northwestern University in the late 80s, put this idea into sharp focus. And they spent over 4 years traveling almost like an odyssey across 300 neighborhoods in North America, some 20 cities. And as they went into these neighborhoods, which were largely known by others as backwaters of pathology, known by the sum of their problems, John and Joe started a different conversation. They invited people to tell them stories about how change happens from their point of view. They invited people to share stories about a time that they and their neighbors came together to make things better. And the stories they shared, some 3,000 stories in all across that 4 years, shared a focus, they brought a way of seeing what actually is used by citizens and by people in neighborhoods to create change. They helped us to see the raw ingredients that people use to make change happen from inside out. These are the 6 building blocks that those communities said are the building blocks that make change happen when it's sustainable and it's endurable. It respects the assets that exist already in communities. 30 years we've traveled across the world, and from communities in Tallahassee in the USA to Torbay, okay, we have heard the exact same report of indigenous communities. People telling us that these are the assets that must be identified, connected, and mobilized. We're going to see real change happen in our world. Imagine what would happen if our traditional ways of helping people flipped. Instead of focusing on what was wrong with individuals and dealing with entire communities, we started with a focus on what's wrong. And then we figured out how to negotiate a new relationship, a more respectful relationship. I think what would happen is that we would see transformation in a way that we could never have imagined.
What are you thinking about that? When I first heard that, one, I felt slightly convicted, like, oh goodness, most of what I've learned has been that I'm helping and doing something to people. So I'm just curious, what are your thoughts? I mean, it's a new way, yes.
I always think that as a physical therapist, my goal and my foundational belief is that I can work with the abilities that someone has and help them move towards something that's better. But they have to bring whatever they have.
Right.
They have to be willing to exercise the abilities they do have with the hope that together we can make something better. And so I think in a one-on-one patient clinician or patient client or provider client relationship, we sort of believe that. We forget about it when we start thinking about communities or nations.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
I have a similar doctor, obviously, PTs. But in the last 10 years, I've been working with the support group. And we have this monthly meeting, which I just sit there and not say much. And after a meeting, people say, I feel a lot better. I didn't say much. I was just sitting there and listening. And that led me to start thinking about, okay, maybe it's not something that we're pushing,
Right.
asking, telling people to do. It is, creating the environment, maybe looking for things that they are strong about.
Yeah. So finding the power within themselves, not so much that we have to really do anything. And so when I first saw this video and I was like, I'm hooked. Let me go find out a bit more about Cormac. And one of my colleagues at the time, she was a director of clinical education. She shared a book that he had authored called Rekindling Democracy. So I ended up reading really all the books that Cormac wrote and then all of his papers, because I just thought he was really a profound speaker. And I thought that also this was a different way of thinking that I hadn't necessarily been taught in any of my education, any of my clinical training. And so we started to try some of these ideas in a physical therapy program when we first started developing it. And then we ended up writing about it, just a quick little story. So we wrote this paper with this ABCD approach, and I had to get the language right because the last thing I want to do is be quoting Cormac Russell and get it wrong. So I'm researching, reading all of his papers and getting the language, even the language of calling people patients. It's interesting what how that person may perceive themselves after, we give them a label like that. So anyway, I'm not saying you can't call people patients, but he does kind of, challenge some of those concepts. So I'm reading and we submit the paper and it gets accepted to PTJ and it gets published. And I see that Cormac downloads the paper. I was like, oh, I hope this goes well. And there are crickets. I don't hear back. And I thought, maybe we did not get this right, but I want to learn. So I got up the nerve this July and I emailed Cormac and I said, hey, I'm a big fan of your work and we're trying to get better at community development. I sent him my paper. I said, I just wanted to know if I can get some feedback on it so we can maybe, so we can get better at this. he immediately emails me back and he was like, I loved your paper and you all really did a good job of highlighting the ABCD concepts. And then he sent me another paper from some work that's happened in Singapore. And now we're kind of starting this relationship of really understanding healthcare, how I'm trying to introduce it into physical therapy education, and then also learning more from him, these community developers, of how to really embrace this model. Actually emailed him. I texted him today and I was like, hey, Quebec, I'm presenting on the community development process with the UNLV community for this insight. I shared with him, I'm talking about evidence-based practice paradigm with cultural responsive pedagogy and community development. He says, thank you so much, Kimberly. Might I offer a slight reframe to evidence-based practice? I personally find practice-based evidence more compelling. I was like, thank you for that reframe. I'll be chewing on that. So what is asset-based community development? Well, ABCD gets to see communities as places full of potential instead of problems that need to be fixed. Every person in the community has unique gifts and skills and talents and passions, and when recognized, they can be used to make the community stronger. ABCD describes a community-led process that brings people together to make change happen locally. So in an asset-based versus a deficit-based perspective, asset-based starts with what's strong and not with what's wrong. The community is looking for, so we're looking at what's strong, we're looking for opportunities. So not looking at, problem focused, but what are opportunities for us to actually find a solution in the community? It's internally focused, meaning we believe that the power comes from the people and not some external force that's going to come in and save the day. It's also looking at what's present and not looking at what's missing. And it's looking at community alternatives versus institutional solutions or institutionalizing something. So let's talk about the role community plays in health. In the United States, health outcomes and life expectancy are connected to where one lives. It is estimated that up to 60% of a person's health is determined by their zip code rather than their genetic code. Putman reports that community connections between neighbors and local associations are powerful, underutilized tools that can reduce the risk of premature death by 50%. Therefore, living in a disconnected community is harmful. In disconnected communities, neighbors are separate from one another and focus on individual survival over community health. Russell and McKnight define connected communities as places where residents nurture neighborhood relationships that enable them to work together to create a good life, supporting the collective well-being. So let's talk about the 5 core principles of asset-based community development. First is citizen-led. There are many things that communities can do for themselves with their neighbors by utilizing these assets. So it's basically the people in the community can do a lot of things themselves. Is asset-based, is starting with what's strong with people and not what's wrong. And it's also based on personal relationships with other people and thereby mobilizing them to actually create change. It's place-based, meaning that we see the neighborhood as the primary unit of change. And that's a powerful strategy for addressing socioeconomic challenges. Typically, helping interventions tend to see individuals and institutions as the most legitimate domains of change to the exclusion of the community. But in an asset-based community development approach, the place-based, you want to take care and make sure that that intervention happens in the community. It's relationship-oriented, meaning everybody has a gift and passion. What we have to do is really help people see whether or not they have those gifts and then connect them to one another. And it's also inclusion-focused. And so communities typically have invisible boundaries. And with the ABCD approach, the people who are at the margins, the fringes of society, they bring them to the center because they believe that everybody has gifts that can contribute to the well-being of the collective. So this is the ABCD 5 core principles. Now I want to share how we did this at College of St. Mary. When I first started working there, we had a director of diversity. Her name was Alexis Sherman. And Omaha, in Omaha, the College of St. Mary is located really in the center of the city. And so Alexis would invite members of the community to College of St. Mary, and she had some outside vendors come and basically cater meals. And she would have these meetings, and she would bring people together at a time when things were a bit more polarized. Well, it's more polarized now. It was less polarized in 2018. But she brought people from different perspectives together in one space, and they were called Red Table Talks, and they would talk about difficult things for dinner. because actually it's easier to talk about difficult things apparently over some free food. And she also invited community members to come and share, what they were doing in the community. And they had different perspectives. We had people from the trans community. We just had lots of folks coming in and sharing their perspectives. And we had, so College of St. Mary, we have the Sisters of Mercy, that's who runs everything. And they're so awesome. And we had sisters who were present who would be there to help facilitate these conversations, and faculty members, students. And it was in that moment that I had a chance to see the power of a university in the community when you do use it for a place for people to connect and learn about each other and learn gifts. And so after some of those meetings, I ended up meeting a lot of the association leaders, the ones who were coming in and also being some of the guest speakers. And one particular person was the program director of a place called the Stevens Center. The Stevens Center is a temporary housing facility in Omaha, and it was developed because people were freezing to death in the winter. And so they developed this housing facility, and basically it's a temporary place where people come in, they move their way up through different parts of the Stevens Center to the point where they then are able to get back into the community and have more sustainable housing. And within the Stevens Center, they have wraparound services to really help find out the reason why somebody may have been, had unstable housing to begin with. So really addressing those factors. And what's also amazing about the Stevens Center is that many of the people who are working there were former clients. So the director shares her story that she walked in with no shoes, and now she's there servicing the community, and she's a graduate of the College of St. Mary. So it was really great to form this partnership with her. But the way we went about it wasn't like, physical therapy program, what can we do to you? We walked in this conversation with, what, you're doing amazing work in the community. What can we do to amplify what you're already doing? And she said, I know physical therapy. That's all I know. A few other things, but that's the thing that we can provide. So you let us know what you think would be best to serve this community here. And she said, well, you know what? A lot of our workers have low back issues. Can you all do a few workshops on that? So sure, we did low back clinics. Anything that they asked, we set it up. The other thing that we've done is we started other partnerships with other places like the Intercultural Center for Seniors and MS Forward. And we've been learning a whole lot about this process of setting up these partnerships. Again, these are great places in the community. You're doing great work. We're just there to amplify the work that they're already doing and just to offer any services that they think that we can provide. So let's look a bit further into what this looks like. And this QR code takes you to that community development paper that we wrote that talks more about this. So what is the role of the culturally responsive practitioner? What do we have access to as healthcare practitioners, as educators? What do we know well? And how can we leverage our position, privilege, and knowledge to best support people in our communities? Typically, when we decide to partner with communities, we might do something called a needs assessment. Anybody heard of a needs assessment? All right. Well, 32 years ago, John Chrisman and John McKnight, they wrote a book talking about building communities, and they highlight how this approach to a needs assessment, just in the title needs assessment, means that there's something wrong in the community. What they recommend is using what's called an asset map, community asset map. So if you look in the center, it has 3 different layers. You've got the gifts of the individual, you have the citizens associations, and you have local institutions on the outward perimeter. But the goal of this is to find out what are the strengths of the people in the center. And what's around them that helps to support what kind of programs they have going on. And then what are things that are going on the outside? So libraries, universities, you name it. But this is a different way of looking at things versus looking at what's the crime rate, what's the truancy rate. It's just a very different way of starting the conversation. The other thing that Cormac shares in this class is the importance of, if we're going to co-create health with people, perhaps we need to think about how we show up in those relationships. And he talks about this, the importance of kind of these 4 paradigms. First, what they highly recommend for ABCD is that it's done by the people. The power starts with them. Now, in a situation like the Stevens Center, if they said, hey, we got people who have low back pain, you all are physical therapists, can you come and do a workshop? We have that expertise. So now we're doing things with the community, with our consultation. They're telling us what it is that they want versus us directing something. The next layer is, if it's absolutely necessary, we can go with the 4 model. So That's more of a charity model. And that's chosen for us, then divided for us. So let's say, for instance, I've identified that there's a need, I've written a grant, and now I'm gonna go do a program someplace. So I'm doing something for someone. What happens when that grant funding stops? Now that resource is pooled, and in some cases, you can cause more harm. So that model is not necessarily the best model. And then lastly, they've identified this as a medical model, is deciding to be provided to us. And that's what us was going someplace and doing something to people. And what they recommend is that we not so much go in that direction, definitely not going in that direction. But if anything, try to be with the by and with category when we are deciding to partner with communities. So we talked about, the importance of community. How do you even get to know people? Well, they recommend that we, start learning conversations with people. So that's what Alexis was doing with those red table talks. It was really starting conversations. Ask people about what they care about. Sometimes they may start off talking about issues that are present, and it's okay. But the next question is, what do you care enough about to act on? So asking them, putting it back in their court, maybe not saying anything, just letting them, tell you what they believe. What local resources or assets can you tap into? I found that most cases, the people who are closest to the problem already probably have the solution and know what to do to solve the problem, and that typically outside players don't necessarily understand how to help solve the problem. Also, in asking in these learning conversations, you can say, who else would be prepared to join in? So many times it's helping them identify their future co-conspirators. And then take to invite them to show up. Something else I wanted to share with you, and I want to give a big shout out to one of my colleagues, Dr. Mika Mitchell, because she shared this amazing resource with me. So as we think about the 80%, the patient values and circumstances, it's helpful if we can connect people to community resources. Has anyone heard of findhelp.com or findhelp.org? Well, if you scan this QR code, it'll take you right there. And I put in the zip code of this university, and there are 2,737 programs of free and reduced cost resources that you can connect people to. So I think this is something really helpful to have just in your back pocket whenever you're working with people. Also, if anything I've shared has been interesting, especially about the asset-based community development approach, this is something that I'm very new to learning more about. Colbeck Russell has a class, it's the last class of 2025, and I've signed up and I'm already learning lots of information. So if you're interested to learn more about asset-based community development, here's a good resource for you. All right, so we've talked about the 3 paradigms. We understand now that evidence-based practice, very important. That 3rd pillar, the patient values and circumstances, in order for us to truly address that particular pillar, we have to understand the people that are in front of us. We do that by becoming culturally responsive practitioners. And the best way that we can actually help address those social determinants of health is if we consider, how we show up in our communities and partnering with people versus doing stuff to them. And I believe that is the new standard of care. So your call to action. Use at least one of the methods mentioned to incorporate culture into your care plan. So that could be maybe the scope note. Reflect on your own culture and how you show up. So that's the reflection assignment that we talked about. Use your position, privilege, and knowledge to connect people to resources. That could be findhelp.org. And then use an asset-based community development approach to co-create health with people. These are my references, and then thank you again for the opportunity to talk and to share these ideas. If you want to connect further to discuss things, this is my QR code for my LinkedIn profile, so we can stay connected and still have conversations. But I am open now for any questions that you might have about the topics. Thank you.
First, I'd like to thank you for coming and speaking to us. My question is, what advice would you have for aspiring practitioners who have some resistance to implementing messages you shared with us today?
It's resistance because they just don't start. Resistance because they just don't want to do it, or resistance.
Resistance as a middle of the importance.
financially, it's going to become important pretty soon. If you're looking at the population demographics, the population that I have been, so in addition to reading stuff, I also like to listen to satellite radio to hear more about what people are talking about. And I would say now more than ever, I am hearing more people who are questioning what's happening to them in their doctor's offices, and they're pushing back. And so if you decide you want to continue practicing the way of the past, eventually it will hit you in the pocket. Typically, money speaks to people. Great question. We have a question. Yeah. Dr. Hunt, there's some questions.
So first of all, thank you for coming to speak to us today. It's really nice for you to come out here. So understanding the cultural aspects of patients to provide higher quality of care is incredibly important, especially in a community like Las Vegas. But we can't really bridge that connection between the clinician and the patient if that barrier to healthcare keeps widening.
Yeah.
And I know you mentioned earlier too, how very beneficial TIA healthcare has been in your personal experience. But if we are trying to help patients that may be at that lower income bracket or may not have access to that, they may not be able to spend extra $200 to get that program on top of that health insurance if they have that. So what are some ways as future clinicians and students in the physical therapy field, how do we reach out into those maybe lower income areas to where we can provide our own personal expertise at the lowest possible costs?
Great question. I think that's why I'm really excited about the possibility of like looking at the community as a place of health. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little bit of feedback. If it's my computer. Here's an example. When I was, I'll step back because it might be resonating. When I was doing clinical practice still, I was working with a water distribution company, and I knew a lot of the workers who were there. They had limited means, but they're blue collar workers. And one of the things I noticed is by doing like health screens and working with them that, many of them were eating fast food because it was convenient and it was cheap. But I also recognized that in Arizona, we had something called a Borders Borderlands, which was produce on wheels without waste. And so every week, grocery distribution companies would give away like 60 pounds of food to people who just had a membership that was like $10 or $15. And I believe if you needed to. That is part of the. Thank you so much. And so something that I did was, even though I know that resources were limited, just tapping them into the different free things or things that were available that were in the community. So I would say the answer to your question would be start spending time really getting connected to the resources. The last few years, I've been spending way more time looking through and really scouring through what's available in my area. I'll be talking and sharing some things with the students tomorrow, but like even if a person who was low socioeconomic status and they had an idea and they wanted to start a business, in my city, which is, I live in Mesa, it's not a real, thriving, it's a city, but it's not Scottsdale. They offer $20,000 for a lifetime for residents starting businesses. I had no idea. Like there are certain resources that might be available that we just might not be tapping into. So I'm not saying every place has that, but I think it's worth looking and exploring. So that's probably where I would first start is like get on findhealth.org and figure out specifically what's in the area and then go investigate the quality of it. And then maybe you could use that as a resource to connect people to those resources. That's where I'd start.
Thank you. So, that sometimes things that we do, trying to help, it can be intrusive. And it can cause more harm. And researchers can probably
And a lot of the times we want intervention research, but my question is that how do we avoid that? Because I do think that most of the interventions comes through, the basic instinct is that we're trying to do good.
Sure.
But a lot of the times it may not be, like that when it's applied to a community, especially the long-term effect. So, but I don't really know how that we can, avoid that.
One thing that Cormac shares in the ABCD model is this idea of, let's say we talk about an intervention or a solution. I think if we're the ones that come up with the intervention, that's where it starts as being perhaps a problem. But what if we gave people options? Like, even I'm a manual therapist, so we always like put our hands on people. I used to do something where I would say, listen, here are your options that are available. Which one would you like to take? And having the person actually be a part of that process. And so I would think, even with research, and I'm exploring this, by the way, I'm exploring this new pathway, decolonizing research methodologies, which is taking me on a whole nother pathway. But this idea of co-creating that learning experience of discovery with the person versus doing something to someone is more of what I'm looking at now. Yeah, I can explain more about that later, but yeah, that's an extraordinary rabbit hole to go down. Yes.
Yeah, just sort of to tag along with that, I do my research with individuals with Down syndrome, and there's this new, like maybe in the past 5 years, method that is really gaining a lot of traction, that is community-based participatory research, which really is sort of the parallel of everything that you described for clinicians for research. And it's fascinating because it's taking those same principles too. That's beautiful.
Yes.
Thank you. Thinking back to your community like strengths versus finding like the weaknesses in the community. I thought one of the interesting things that was on there was lead poisoning. There are so many cities that have piping that needs to be changed because it's poisoning people. Those situations where you just have to identify the problem and fix the problem. And I just think lead poisoning is a good example of your strengths don't matter if the problem is lead poisoning.
Trying to understand a person's culture that we're treating, that we're working with. But I am very grateful for my upbringing. I'm grateful that, I can receive a doctorate education at a wonderful university. And so now I'm going to go out to the community. I'm going to try to serve people. And most of the time, they're going to be, less educated than I am. They're going to not have a lot of these amazing opportunities that I've had. So how do I approach people and show that I do truly care about their culture without being pretentious, without, seeming like you come from this, very privileged culture, but I don't. So how do I say that I do care about their culture and kind of get them to open up to me who may seem very different from them?
I think what you do is say goes a long way. And valuing people as being human beings is one of the first steps. And so just even you recognizing, hey, I come from a position of privilege, I want to be able to connect better with people. It can start with something as simple as this. When I was at Kaiser, I was one of the residents and I had the best patient satisfaction scores compared to the other fellows. That was kind of interesting because I was like, I didn't know a whole lot compared to them. But when people came into my space, right away I had this little small cubby hole. It wasn't really much of a clinical place at all, but I was a resident, only resident. And right away, I would get down to the level of the person I'm speaking with, and I would start having this conversation and really trying to get to know that person. Now, what's so funny is that there was a fellow who was getting not so good scores. He was like, "What are you doing in your session that's different than mine?" I said, "Well, when you're in your session, you're like 6'4". I was like, "Are you standing up when you're talking? This is something super simple." And he was like, "Well, yeah." I said, "Try kneeling or sitting down when you're engaging with them." To let them know, because there's sometimes power dynamics in how we can take up space. And that's something super low level. But that's something I just recognize. I'm entering into your space. Even now as a program director, I recognize how much power that is. I always lower my seat when people come into my office because I want them to know that we're on the same level. And I don't like hierarchies. And so I do everything I can on the teams that I work with to us all recognize we are a team of leaders. And even in understanding that somebody might not have formal education, that means they're not brilliant. And so sometimes there are those perceptions that, well, they might not know something, but I've been schooled many times by people who don't have all the letters behind their names, and I'm always a student. That's the way I see myself. I don't care how many degrees I get, I'm always a student. And that has been a good way to bridge that gap, especially recognizing and checking our code. And the first part, you've already identified, I'm gonna check my privilege. I know I have this. And I also try my best not to try to tell people what to do. I like to give both options. Here's what the research says, here's what I can provide for you. Which one would you like? And that seems to go. Thank you for the question.
We have one question from one of our online friends. In regards to the 3 tenets of culturally responsive pedagogy, we expounded on the personal. Is there anything that should be of note regarding the other 2?
That's more for educators, but I think it's relevant in our teaching environment here. So for the institutional one, that does play a bit of the development. I'm supposed to be talking to that. Thank you, sorry. The institutional one really talks about how the institution partners with communities. Sometimes we are, taking resources from communities depending upon how money flows within a particular city. And so what they recommend is that, recognizing the fact that, we could be having resources that are being diverted to the institution, that we then consider using that to help support the community. So what can we do with our community space? Another thing they mentioned for the institutional model is looking at the policies that we have. Sometimes we have policies that are very harmful to people. And they're policies that were passed down to us. Whenever you run into a policy that creates a lot of stress on your team, start questioning, is that policy really necessary? And where did it come from? There's a lot of rules that we have in place that were really passed down to really create control. And so it's a good idea to look at those. The instructional dimension, which is super important, is looking at how we teach as faculty. Many of us, we're clinicians, we're clinically trained. However, going to school to become a clinician is very different than teaching people how to become clinicians. It's a skill. And we have to be equipped as faculty, understanding how to present content, how to break it down, how to connect with learners. And so those are really the other 2 dimensions. The institutional is, like I said, institution with policies and how you connect with the community, but the instructional is understanding how to teach. And you got to show up personally. If your mind isn't right, into an environment, it's going to influence how you show up as an educator and clinician. Thank you for that question. Yes.
My question is, do you have any tips for incorporating a discussion about health beliefs and culture while still having time to gather objective data in our initial evaluation? I want to get to know my patients, but at the same time, clinics have time restraints. I'm from Hawaii, where we like to talk forever. So I feel like asking about health beliefs and culture can open this can of worms. So how do we stay on track during an initial evaluation?
Lucky for you, I teach subjective history. So I normally teach my students, before we even talk about culture, the importance of understanding what you'd be asking going in. So I'll go back to that slide. Sorry for the. This one. I'm very particular about how I ask questions and the way in which I ask the questions. And I teach students, actually, I'm just teaching this week to our first year students. And if I'm efficient, typically it takes about 8 to 10 minutes to collect this data. The rest of the time you're going to spend on your objective exam. Now, if you don't collect the necessary information to ask the right questions, then it's going to take you longer to get to your objective part. The clues are in the subjective history and how you ask the questions. And so I just happen to ask, and you're going to have to gauge that by the person you're speaking with. Sometimes you might have somebody who really, really likes to talk about things. So you might have to maybe use more close-ended questions, or maybe start with that first open-ended question. Is there anything I should include in the healthcare plan related to your cultural values and beliefs? And keep it simple. That's probably where I'd start. But you're welcome to use this. The first S in subjective is the 5 components of the subjective. So finding out side of symptoms. I'm sure you all go through that in your program, but that's how I would start it. Sorry, I'm gonna feedback.
Sorry, I have a follow-up question. So for the C part, would we, whatever the patient tells us, would we include that in the subjective part when we're documenting?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm going to use that information to then make sure that I incorporate that in the full assessment part in the plan and the plan. They don't care about range of motion. I mean, they do to a certain extent, but they care about doing the activities that they care about. Yes.
I was thinking about addressing different cultures and health disparities, and I'm thinking about my own community where there is a lot of abuse, particularly with children, and how that affects them as they're growing up and their socioeconomic status. And I'm thinking about, well, 2 questions in one is, first, how do I approach my patients? Because I want to be a pelvic health therapist. How do I approach them without being insensitive by accident? Because I could know all the tricks in the book, but how do I come across? I don't want to come across to them as dismissive or totally misunderstand when now they're offended, but also too, how do I address them without letting whatever their negative experiences or trauma is, and how do I not let that affect me and how I'm treating them? Because I may have my bias for my own experiences and then project that onto them. How do I not let that affect me?
That's a bit tough, and I would say that the key thing I would say is making sure that you have appropriate training before moving into that space. For sure, the clinical part, but then also there's the psychological component too, of working with individuals who've had some trauma. So maybe getting some trauma-informed, training. The other part that you mentioned is how can it, to prevent it from negatively impacting you. Was that the second part of the question?
Yes. How do I not let it negatively impact me and therefore project accidentally with my biases project a negative treatment on them?
Sure. Well, there are a couple of things. One, we talked about the personal reflection piece. I spend a ton of time in personal reflection. I have this feeling. Why do I have this feeling? And I start to identify, okay, this was said and this is what triggered me to respond in this way. So I go down this hole of making sure that I'm figuring out where did this feeling come from, where are the root causes, and then begin to address with the root. The other piece I'm going to say is I'm a firm believer of getting mental health not assessments primarily, but just making sure that I've got a support system in case I'm walking into environments that are going to potentially impact me in a way where I'm not able to show up as my best self. And so I think that as therapists, that should be kind of something that's just standard practice to a certain extent, depending upon the population that you're working with. So part of it is doing some self-work, making sure that you have adequate, I would say, preparation before moving into those spaces, but then also as you're experiencing things, making sure in case it's something that you can't process internally yourself, that you have some support.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Hi. So in regards to the culture, I see that you have identified strengths. What is the purpose of that? What questions would you ask? Why would you ask those questions and that to that extent?
It kind of falls in line with like the asset-based community development approach, where I'm looking to find out what strengths do they bring to, the treatment plan. So tell me what it is. And it might not be something where I just go, what are your strengths? The person says, I love running. Okay, we're going to play off of that. I'm not going to say, well, don't work out. I'm going to do my best to incorporate whatever it is that they are doing, especially if it's going to advance what we're trying to do together. I'm going to amplify that even more.
Okay, thank you.
Because they might not know right away, but it's like investigating. We good?
Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you, everybody, for attending. Clinicians, if you elected to have a paper CEU certificate, don't forget to grab it on the way. If you need the digital, I'll be able to get to you in the next couple of days. And thank you so much to all friends that have joined us tonight too. So thank you so much. Have a great evening.